Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Stand Alone, where we want to go from being ordinary to extraordinary. And when you think about that, we all start off the same, but we don't finish the same. So, like, what are the things that we have to get right in our life? There's a lot, right? It's not one thing that we're going to have to do. And so, one of the greatest things that I've been able to do in my life is with this podcast, find extraordinary people that have tapped into one area that we can learn from through their expertise. So today we have with us Dr. Mike Hayes. So Dr. Mike Hayes, he's the author of When God Is First and sold over 1 million copies in 8 different languages. That's a big deal. Founding pastor of the Covenant Church. You're also a faith advisor in Washington, D.C., and contributed to the Abraham Accords. I think that's incredible and amazing. And, Mike, what I wanted to do, is it okay if I call you Mike or Dr. Mike? What would you?
Absolutely, Mike, please.
Okay, great. So, Mike, you have a new book out that is called Real Happy, and it's about, Jesus's surprising path to genuine joy. And I wanted to dive into this today because in my audience, we're go-getters. We want to have the best of everything. And sometimes we are sacrificing happiness or what we think is happiness to get some other thing, which we want because we think it will make us happy. So we're very confused and we're probably running in a vicious circle. But when you read your book, there's some things that I was just like, oh, this is good. This is really good. So I wanted to dive into this. So to kick this off, thank you for being here with us. Number one. The first question I have for you is, like, what made you write about happiness? Because when I think of someone in the faith world, I don't think of someone really preaching that message of happiness. It's often a lot of suffering, a lot of sacrifice. So what made you want to dive into this and then attach it to your faith?
Well, that's a great question. And the way it happened is literally, I was in Israel. I was up on the north of Galilee, and I had done a teaching with some people that came for a tour, and I taught from Matthew 6 about the Beatitudes. I read them, and there was and I'd done that before, but there was a particularly strong presence that day. I felt tender. I was kind of teary, and I felt a prompting really to write a book on happiness, because what I had shared that day is that the translators of scripture in about the 15th century changed the word in that passage from happy to blessed are. And that sounds, a bit more high church and holy, blessed are the, and the truth is the word used there was makarios, which is the Greek word for filled with joy and happiness. And blessed are has a little bit different connotation than happiness. So in fact, when I felt the prompting to write a book on happiness, honestly, my first reaction was, God, why don't you give me a big subject that's really important? Happiness is trivial to you. I mean, you're interested in holiness and purity and judge me if I don't. And that shows a lot about a lot of people's concept of God. And this book and the research that went into it for 5 years turned that whole idea on its head for me. And I'm on a mission now to present a whole new understanding that God wants us really happy, and that real happy is not about things external, but about internal. And so that's the lesson of the book. That's where it begins.
Yeah, I love this. Where you talk about, towards the end, you really get into the true meaning of happiness and you go into it in a deeper sense. But I think I just want to start off by saying, you put it very simply. You give the analogy of the poppy flower, and then you build around this. But Three very important things that we can all relate to is number one, we all want to be happy. There's no one that's born that says like, I just want to be miserable. Like something happened to you. And then
Yeah.
you got to get back to that original stance where like you were born with joy. Like when you have children and you see their spirit, their natural spirit, they don't have an angry spirit. Like something happened to create that. Number two, we want to share our happiness. I think this is a really important message today because in this world where, there is a lot of envy, the reason why people share their happiness with you is not to create a negative thing. Like when you're envying someone, it's turned into a negative thing. But if we can really have joy with our fellow brother and sister for their happiness, that's a beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
then number three, you talk about we want our happiness to last. So I think
Yeah.
I just want to start off with this because you kicked it off with this, and then you go into the history of it. But let's get into the world today, right? So the world today, you alluded to this, is a world of just more is more. And
Yeah.
you said this phrase of like, we are dopamine chasers right now. So this is not what we're talking about. And we'll get into this as you go in more in depth. But what are we doing right now to fulfill our happiness by chasing dopamine that is not making us happy? And we're filling voids in our life. And then we can transition
Yeah.
into what you describe as meaningful, lasting, and spiritual happiness.
Sure. I want to, if I could just start with the poppy, the reason it made the front cover of the book. If you
Yes.
saw the book, I got the book here. The poppy is the front cover
Mm-hmm.
because the day that I got this prompting to write the book, the whole hillside was covered in these poppies. And the translation here again, in the King James version of the Bible, Jesus said, "Consider the lilies." But that word translated into lilies by mid-century, 15th century Europeans was not accurate. It at best should have been wildflower, but specifically should have been poppy. Jesus didn't say, "Consider the lilies." There weren't lilies there. There were poppies everywhere. And that's the national flower of Israel. So Jesus would have said, "Consider the poppies." They don't work hard. They don't spin yarn to make their clothes, but Solomon has never been clothed more beautiful. And the thing Jesus was attacking is anxiousness, because he said, "Why are you anxious about what you're going to wear or eat? Why are you anxious about the future?" The reason he did that is because the other side of the coin of happiness is anxiousness. And he attacks anxiousness or anxiety in this message because it's not possible to be anxious and to be happy at the same time. Now, here's what's happened to us. In our pursuit of things to make us happy, we have exhausted ourselves physically and our poor adrenal glands are worn out. And we've exhausted ourselves emotionally, and we're mostly empty spiritually. So we find ourselves, I mean, half of Americans are taking some kind of anti-anxiety medicine. This is a huge problem.
Hmm.
I'm not saying don't take your medicine. I'm saying let's look at why we're anxious. And happiness is the antidote to anxiety. You can't be anxious and be happy at the same time. And it comes down to trust. It is a trust issue. You said something really important a minute ago when you were opening this up about us being really born with joy. There's nothing like a child's laughter,
Mm-hmm.
but life happens to us. And when it knocks us down, the way we respond to that ends up sometimes, for years, we've been building a fort of protection to try to keep ourselves safe. And we're afraid. We're anxious. And especially the one he touches on that I'd like to mention is fear of anxiousness about the future, what tomorrow holds. And we are inundated 24/7 with challenging, painful, news that makes us feel everything from empathy to compassion to depression about the condition of pain in the world and what people are going through. So we feel like we have a lot of justifiable reasons to be really anxious about the future. And yet we can't control that. Jesus says, how many of you by worry have added one day to the length of your life?
Yeah.
In fact, the other side of that is you've probably taken days off of the length of your life by worry. See? So we are destroying anxiousness and anxious thought by adopting the understanding of how to be happy, really happy.
It's powerful when you talk about with, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and, just how their idea of happiness, how it went from this thing of, this is not a luck that some
Right.
people are happy and some people are miserable. It then switches to something that people pursue.
Right.
It then goes into a quest and a spiritual feeling that we have, that really leads to the good life.
Yeah.
What could you speak about for people, especially today, where it's just so easy to be unhappy? And, to what I always do is I keep things in perspective, because even when things happen, I'm still just very grateful because I get to live in this great country. I get to pursue a lot of dreams, but sometimes I meet people and it's hard for them to understand that you can choose to be happy, even if there's not everything perfect in your life the
Yeah.
way it is. What could you say about those old teachings and then apply it to today's people that are hurting and they think it's like, well, you're just happy and I'm not?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the things that we came to understand in the research for this book is that, for instance, and sort of a by the way, I mentioned in the book, I went to Vietnam a few years ago and I gave a teaching on this. But before I did, I said to the gentlemen in the room, they were leaders there in the nation, and I asked them about their own experience. I wanted to hear their story. And there were 12 of them in the room before we ate lunch, and then I was going to give a lecture. And when they finished telling me their story, I was in tears. Collectively, around the table with 12 men, I counted up 58 years, I think it was, that they had collectively spent in prisons and persecution and beatings for who they were and what they were trying to teach under a repressive government. And yet these guys gathered around that table with each other, were a fraternity of happy brothers that had been in the worst of times and some of the happiest men I'd ever met. And I had to learn from them, where does this come from? How can you be happy and have been through what you've been through? So it became part of my answer. And here's the thing, every world's religion, I happen to come from Christianity as a Christian, and that's the perspective I write from. But part of my degree is in comparison religions, and I understand that every major religion in the world has one chink in the armor. And unfortunately, Christianity is not supposed to, but we've added that. And that is that every religion in the world is basically a quest by man who knows he needs help to chase a God down to get help from them, knowing that they're unworthy. The God they're pursuing is upset and angry with them, and they've got to appease him with some kind of service or sacrifice. I lectured on this recently, and Jeff and I were together in this, and one young man stood up and exited the room quickly. I didn't know what was wrong with him. When he came back, Dr. Jeff, my associate, said to him after the meeting, what was wrong with you? Because he came back in and he'd obviously been crying. And he said, when it suddenly dawned on me that all of my life, I've been trying to make God happy with me. And when I found out that God is trying to make me happy, it changed my life. I couldn't help but weep, because I I rest in and I relax in the joy that he has for me. I am his son. He loves me. He wants me to do well. So the philosophy, as simple as it is, by the way, as a lady, and you're an outstanding lady, you're doing a great job, and you're in media, and you're a beautiful lady. You'll enjoy knowing this. A lady named Juliana of Norwich in England in the 14th century is the oldest documents that we know of written by a woman about the subject of happiness. And her story goes like this. She picked up an acorn one day, and she was contemplating the acorn, and she was troubled about things in her life. And she said, what is ever going to become of this acorn? It's so small, and it may be destroyed. It may never become a tree. And in her contemplation, she says, the Juliana of Norwich says that the Spirit of God spoke to me and said, I made it, I love it, and I'll take care of it. And that's the same way I feel about you. I made you, I love you, and I'll take care of you. That's the message of the poppy. I'm not red and beautiful and covering this hillside because I labor or worry, but I'm cared for by a creator that loves me. And that's what Christianity needs to be rebaptized in. I think Christianity has done a good job with some of the message of repentance or of heaven or whatever. There's a number of messages, grace, you can choose them. I don't think we've done a good enough job of spreading happiness, and the kind of happiness that's real and genuine that God really wants us to have. He's happy. He's crazy about us.
That feels so good. And, I know it to be true. This is why, like, whatever happens, I always tell myself it's supposed to happen because there's something over my life that is far greater than me than I can even understand in the moment. And
Exactly.
so I give my worries away because I do. I empathize for people because I can see a lot of worry in people. And a lot of people will think about me like I'm just cold. I don't have feelings. And it's like, no, it's not that I'm cold and I don't have feelings. I just have a higher trust and faith
Yeah,
that something is
sure.
moving for me. So
Absolutely.
I love
Well,
that.
one of the things that we like to ask people is, are you as happy as you think you could be? And most people say, no, I'd like to be happier than I am. I don't want to be ungrateful. And then we ask them, well, what are you doing to be happier? And most of the time, a lot of times I coach young business people, and most of the time, their answer is involving something that is in the physical realm. And I don't know how long we have to chase those things to understand that having the right car and the right woman and the right watch and the right suit is not going to make you happier. It might make you look better and you'll temporarily feel better about yourself. But real happiness doesn't come from external things, but internal things. And of course, the first beatitude that we work with in the book is, and that's one that, and stop me if I'm being too long here, but
No.
that's one that really sets the stage for the whole thing. And I have to say, it's been so poorly translated. The King James translation of the first beatitude says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth. Well, the bad translation is that the way that should read from the original Greek is, happy are those who create a void in their spirit to be filled with the best things, which are spiritual things. Most of us fill the void of our spirit, our heart, with physical things, emotional things, relational things that aren't eternal. So actually, what Jesus is doing in that first beatitude is saying, look, I want to give you an unbelievable joy and happiness, but you got to give me some room. You have filled up the void with stuff that doesn't belong in there, and it's not going to give you lasting joy.
Yeah, I wrote this down, like poor, you say it in your book, poor is empty. Like if you can
Yep,
elaborate on this, because for a lot of people, we are so concerned, Mike, about filling ourselves up. And I look to people, and I'm not saying this from a judging place. I'm just saying like this is why most people go to alcohol and
yep,
drugs and
yep,
because it's like, well, not only can I not fill myself up, like let me numb myself
yep,
so I don't
yep,
even understand that I'm empty. But this is so beautiful because in emptying ourselves, we create space, which you talk about in your
yeah,
book, for something eternal to fill.
yeah.
Could you elaborate on this? I think this is so powerful for people to understand.
Well, it is. And here's the thing, we are all, whether you're a religious person, a person of faith or not, the God that created us made us all the same. And we are what we theologians call a triune being, but that means you're made up of body, soul, and spirit. Simple explanation is that body is the physical. That's the part that lives on oxygen and nourishment and so forth. And our soul is made up of what we would call our mind, our heart. It's simplest to say our emotions, our intellect, and our will is the soulish realm. And then the third realm is the spiritual realm. That's the part of us that is eternal. It came from God, it will return to God. It's the forever part of you. And so happiness on three scales could be okay, there are things that are no doubt physically satisfying. A nice meal. I had a beautiful meal with Kathy last night at a French restaurant, and I enjoyed the lamb chops and it was wonderful. But after 3 or 4 hours, by the time I went to bed, I was looking for a snack. That's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
That's physical.
Mhm.
And then the soulish realm is where we get an emotional kick out of a friend, a visit with a friend, or a new car, or it makes us happy, but it doesn't last. It's always disappointing when it's kind of, they say the shine is off, and pretty soon it's like I don't get out of that what I used to. But then our spirit, which is the part of us that longs to connect to God, a God that's not angry with us, but happy with us and wants our company, our pleasure, to be with us. So that part is filled by gratefulness, by praise or thanksgiving, not just to God, but to people. We're way below where we should be on building people up. You know, one of my favorite things is that when I go to restaurants, this might be a wrong assumption on my part. I don't think so. If a young lady comes to my table and she's in her 40s or 50s and she's taking my order, my assumption is she's not here for her health. She probably needs a second job. She has 3 children. She's got 2 in college. She needs to earn extra money. She would rather be home eating bonbons and watching a movie than serving me in a restaurant. So I honor those people. And what I like to do is I like to just look at them and I like to take them in and I like to say, listen, I see something so special on your life. And I know you've got big dreams. I don't know what they are. Maybe you want to tell me what they are. And it's amazing how quickly people latch onto that and talk to you about what they dream to accomplish and how quickly they respond to a word of affirmation. All of us, listen, all of us want to hear from somebody, there's something special about you. There's something on your life. Well, what that feeds is not the physical or emotional part of us. It's really a spiritual need. And we have to establish that connection. So the more distant we get from the God that made us, the more we struggle to be happy and never find real joy. So it is a spiritual connection. It's internal.
Yeah, this is powerful because when we think about fasting, that's the whole beauty of fasting, to empty ourselves out. And
Yeah.
fasting doesn't have to be just stop eating. It could be, just taking a break from social media. I wanted to ask you, Mike, how does someone hear from God what their special calling is, as opposed to just observing other people and coming from a place of envy, like, you have this, I want this also? How do we know it's really like the blessing placed on our life, so that we could, do we have to get silent? What are the steps that we can take to grow in that relationship with God, so we can hear what
Yeah,
is what is the calling of our life, as opposed to just comparing, which we're doing too much today?
absolutely. Well, great question. And I would give you two things really quickly. Number one, you mentioned getting quiet and even fasting. By the way, if you think the voice of your flesh is not really strong, just cut off the food for a day and see how quickly it realizes. I talked to a guy that I encouraged to fast, and he called me later, and it was so funny. He said, I'm not a breakfast eater anyway. I never eat breakfast. I hit the door in the morning, I have some coffee. I don't ever eat till lunch. But
Mhm.
on the day that I said I was going to fast, he said I was at work, and about 9:30, I thought I was going to faint. I was so hungry. And all of a sudden I came to myself and said, "You are so silly. You never eat till noon anyway. Why are you actually have convinced yourself you're starving and you're going to faint right here on your desk."
Yeah.
So silence. In fact, a friend of mine, Amira Ko, she wrote a book called 4 Minutes. And the context of the book is, if you will get in a quiet place, and if you will just be thankful for the good things that God has done for you, and then just get quiet for 4 minutes. And at the end of 4 minutes, write down what you believe, if it's one word, what you believe you've heard God say. And it's amazing. In her book, she points out the experience of so many people, the amazing things that they hear when they just get quiet for a designated 4 minutes to listen, just to listen. And then, secondly, I would say that I like to say that your alignments in my life, my alignments have created my assignments. The people that I choose to be with have so much to do with the path that I move on going forward, because we're all influencers and we're all influenced.
Mhm.
And the Bible says in Proverbs that bad company corrupts good manners. There's something I've observed in human nature and in behavioral science. We have learned that if you take a kindergarten class of children, if you put one really good kid in a 30 children class with 29 unruly bad kids, the good kid is not going to influence the 29 to be good. The good kid is more likely to be influenced to become bad. Same thing. If you put a bad kid in a group of 29 good kids, the bad kid is going to evolve to being better. We are so much what we hang around with. And I want to be with people that inspire me and that believe in me, and that, when you are in the presence of people that you deem to be great, maybe better than you in some way at their craft or whatever, there's only one of three responses that we feel immediately when we get in the presence of someone great. We either feel jealous, or we feel intimidated, or we feel inspired. And I'm telling you, one of the great keys to joy and happiness for me is to not be intimidated or jealous of great people, but to be inspired. And what happens is, when you're inspired by great people and you let them know that, listen, you've been really inspiring to me in my life, and I appreciate that. Well, then they become a resource to you to help you. But if you react in intimidation or jealousy, listen, you're a career person and you're obviously accomplished, and you're hosting this podcast today. You have a sensitivity to that. You can tell when someone has a hang up or a jealousy, or you're like, what's wrong with them? But when someone is open and their comments are complimentary and they express how much they appreciate getting to meet you and would love to know you more, you want to pour something good into them. And that's a huge part of our happiness, is who we hang with. Some of us listening to this podcast today need to do an inventory of the relationships we have in our life. And we got to make some hard choices and cut some of them off because they're not good for us.
Yeah, it's making me understand, like, when someone in my business, when we feed positively into one another, it's such a joyful experience. And then you want to give more to them, then they give more to you. And that's the same relationship that we can have with God. When we're
Absolutely.
coming from a place of joy, God's like, let me bless you more. Let me give
Yeah.
you more joy, then you give more. And it's a beautiful thing. It's just the way, how do we say it to people that are not in that space, that are in that negative feedback loop, to get them to understand, if you just test out for a moment, let's change the way you think. I think that's
Yeah.
why podcasts are so important, because you have everything to gain. You have everything to gain.
Yeah.
Mike, I love how you talked about Moses. This was one of my favorite parts in your book, when you dive into the transformation of Moses and when you talk about what meekness is, because especially in the business world, we have to put on some persona sometimes of like
Sure.
strength. And being a female in business is a very masculine space. I do not pretend that it isn't. I love it. I think it's a
Right.
beautiful thing. But I also know that I have there's a quiet strength that you can have, right? There is a way that you can carry yourself that it's almost like it's a very powerful thing. And you use the example of Moses. I just love this, where God took a stubborn, angry, insecure man and he transformed him into the meekest man on earth. Can you explain what it means to be meek? Because we tend to associate this with weakness. You
Yeah.
said something that, in my journey, this is something I actually aspire to. So when you were writing about this, I felt like it hit me so hard, because God put certain people in my life and he's trying to cultivate this spirit in me where he wants me to be strong, under control.
Yeah.
You talk about this. I think this is so major for future business leaders of the world to hear.
Absolutely. Well, a little confession. I will have to say that of all the Beatitudes that I researched and wrote on in this book, this one probably personally affected and changed me more than any of them, because early on I equated, it almost even rhymed, meekness and weakness. And I equated meekness with weakness. And I remember a time when the scripture would talk about Jesus being a meek and mild, or there's an old church hymn they used to sing about Jesus being meek and mild. I didn't like that song because I thought Jesus was cool, and I wanted to see him as strong.
Mhm.
And he's not meek and mild, because to me, meek meant weak. And then when I understood that it did not mean weak at all, but in fact, it's one of the greatest kind of strengths, because it is the understanding that I am strong, but I choose to be under control.
Yes.
And one of the stories I had in the book that I'm still mad at the editors for cutting in this chapter is one of the great lessons to me. We did put a little story in there about Mustang horses, but the greatest story about meekness to me that helped me so much is that the Romans, and I'm a history buff, in early centuries, the Roman army was the mightiest in the earth. But in actual fact, Romans were the smallest men that ever formed an army. They were little guys. Archaeologists have dug up what was swords for Romans would look like a knife for us. They were not big guys, but they are the ones who bred wild horses that they had captured that were unbelievably strong. They began to breed them and train them as war horses. And the key was that they wanted the strongest horse that they could breed, but the most under control horse, because when they got in the din of battle, just a strong horse was not going to help if it went crazy and lost its cool and threw them off or ran off. So meek was a word that was sort of coined in the original language by the Romans to mean strong but controlled. And they were talking about war horses. A war horse was worthless that was strong but wouldn't stay under control in the heat of battle. And that's what I challenged myself with when I began to understand that this was, and here's what Jesus said: happy are the strong who are under control, for theirs is the kingdom. So my kingdom, my domain, my business, my family, my success is going to be contained in my ability to, yes, learn physically, work out, be strong, be in good shape, mentally, be well learned, well read. You can win any argument, but you're under control. So you choose the response to every stimuli that comes in your life, whether it's as simple as someone cutting you off in traffic. I'm strong, but I'm under control. If you're in a business meeting and you're at a roundtable discussion or a board meeting, and there is someone that is not so controlled, you're actually going to win by keeping your strength under control. Because if you can keep your strength under control when others cannot, you're going to win. Mm-hmm. And also, guess what? You're going to be more happy. You got to make up your mind. I'm not going to allow something that's temporary to cause permanent damage to my life, my mind, my happiness, my career, my relationships. I mentioned this on a podcast the other day, last week. They asked me a question about the obvious upcoming this year of election and how divisive it's setting up to become. And I said, well, before we even know for sure who both candidates are for president, I want to tell you this. I've already made up my mind that there is no way that I'm going to allow someone that I choose to vote for, or you choose to vote for, and you choose somebody different than I did. There's no way a discussion about that I'm going to allow that to separate me as your friend for someone who's going to serve 2 or 4 or 8 years in office and then they're gone and they ride off in the sunset, never to be heard from again, to write their book and build their library, and you and I are still enemies. That's a foolish thing to allow. Yeah. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to stay happy. I'm not going to allow that to separate me from good people.
Yeah. I mean, this is powerful because, you know, the most powerful things are the most simple. And if we can understand, like, where is the spirit of stubbornness inside of me? You know, for me, like, it's not even in the business world. Sometimes I'm so controlled in the business world, but then as a mother, like, they can do something and I'm like, woo, I go to a place and then I have to like calm myself down and, you know, have control over that strength. But the insecure part, I wanted to talk to you about this because, like, true strength is in knowing who you really are. And I think it's so powerful when Moses went to God and said, why are you picking me? Like, I can't even speak properly. I don't have these powers. And if you, towards the end of your book, you talked about essentially what my podcast is all about. How do we go from being ordinary to extraordinary? And if you allow God into your life, I really believe that is how that happens. He can take what is ordinary and, you know, blossom it into something extraordinary. Can you talk about what a lot of us feel today? And it's through comparison, it's through social media, it's through like, I'm not perfect in this part of my life. And, you know, what can we do and learn to reassure ourselves that we all have insecurities, but we're on a path. And if you can do the right things, we can transform and build that strength
Yeah.
that is under control. Because I think that is the ultimate. That is the ultimate.
Absolutely. Well, if you can get yourself under control, you're doing what most of the population is not, because we have reached a place where, like Kathy, my wife, says, the internet and social media has given every mouse a microphone. And it's like, what happens is everybody's got a voice, and especially young people are giving way too much credence to what somebody said about them. So here's what we have to do. We have to build ourselves up with good stuff. So back to relationships that are healthy for us and that build us up. We all need that, and we have to intentionalize that. I would say that that's not just going to happen by accident. We have to intentionalize developing relationships that are mutually beneficial. Anyone that hangs around somebody that is tears them down all the time, cuts their legs out from under him, makes snide remarks, you're not going to have good self-image. Of course, scripture is one of the great places that you can get an image built of you, because there's an interesting scripture that says and it's talking about living our lives successfully, and it says, we war according to prophecy. It's a New Testament scripture, but to prophesy is not to predict one's future as much as it is. I like to say that the simple definition of a prophecy in scripture is anointed scriptural declaration. So if I say over you something that is in agreement with what God says of you, and if I say to you today, listen, you are really special. I've enjoyed meeting you. And I'll tell you one thing, there's not another person on the planet that has your unique fingerprint. You know, what we've learned in DNA testing is that all of us on the planet are 99% the same. There's only 1% difference between you and every other human on the planet. But in that 1%, part of the way it manifests is that 1% manifests as your unique thumbprint that not another person on this planet has. So much so that you can be individually identified by the FBI by your thumbprint, because nobody else on the planet has it. That's manifested in that 1% uniqueness. So what you have to start doing is identifying what is the 1% in my life that really does give me a way to win, because magnifying that, all the rest of the stuff you work on. I can become a fiend in the gym, and if I work out hours a day and I've got an 8-pack and I got the whole deal, I'm just one of 1,000 more that have the same thing. But I have a 1% potential in me to be something that nobody else on this planet is. And that's what I got to work on. And that's what I got to remind myself of every day. And if you can do that and keep yourself under control, I thought it was cute a while ago you mentioned the kids, and because we all have those places that can, as they say, get your goat. You know, some people don't have road rage problems and others do. Some people have kid problems, and you got that one that just gets on your last nerve. And so whatever it is, we've all got that point. We've also all got that pain point. And when I'm coaching people about happiness, I always try to get to that as soon as I can, because that's what, the quicker we can figure out what is the pain point, the better, the quicker we can get them helped and understand. Because, for instance, do I have time for a quick example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I was talking to a young man here recently, and everything in his life just seemed perfect. And he didn't know it, but it was happiness coaching, we call it, and we use the book as the outline for it. And I just couldn't get to a pain point. His family was perfect. His parents had raised him great. He had great relationships. His marriage was good. I asked him about his wife, and he said, she's great. We've been married 15 years, good marriage. We've been to seminars and we strengthen it, and we're really in love with each other. And I'm like, man, I'm thinking to myself, I might have met the first guy that just doesn't have a pain point. And then I said, great, that's wonderful. 15 years you've been married. Just a random question. You have kids? And when I asked him that, he immediately dropped his head and tears just popped out of his eyes and started running down his face. That was his pain point. And he said, no, we don't have children. We've tried everything for 10 years and we can't have kids. So I was able to talk to him about that, and it identified where we needed to help him find a place of joy. And of course, the one I applied there was Jesus said, happy are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And the secret sauce for that one is that whatever causes you to mourn, if it's the loss of a loved one, employment, can't have children, whatever it is, if you open yourself to God's comfort, his promise is my comfort is going to be greater for you than whatever caused you to mourn. So much so that you're not going to lose memory of your loss, but you're going to be so comforted that you're going to be able to deal with it and still be happy. That's the challenge. The challenge of this book is showing people that you're going to have to figure out a way to be happy in spite of setbacks and problems, because everybody's going to have those. And if our happiness is contingent on everything in our life being perfect, we're not ever going to be happy. And that's the misnomer of what people are trying. If I can just get everything in my life perfect, then I'm going to be happy. Not going to be. Happiness is so powerful and so strong that God can work with it, and you can have real happiness in spite of what you're going through.
Yeah. When I picked up your book, I literally was like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm going to go to war here, because I'm just so trained to not focus on happiness. It's like deeply, deeply embedded into me. And I started asking myself, like, why is that? Why am I so against this? And then I started to understand, like, I've always been in pursuit of happiness. I just call it something else. And, when you get to this place of fulfillment, I think that's what we're all aiming for, to feel that fulfillment, but it doesn't only come from us, and anytime we experience a loss, it's what you said here. It's creating that spaciousness that God can come in and fill you up so much more than you could with something else. So I think your message is so powerful. I think the timing of it is incredibly important. And I just encourage everyone to get this book and read it. And it's so good that, just daily read a little bit, put it down, and then pick it up again. And what you'll do is you'll start to see things differently. And I think that's the power of a good book. It can rearrange, the lens that we look through things. So I just want to say thank you for having an impact in my life. I know that we are going to impact and, help to influence so many people through this podcast. So I just appreciate your time. Where can people go to find out more about your message? Where can people go if this conversation today made someone feel like I have work to do? How can they connect with you to get that work done?
Two simple ways. They can go to mikehayes.org, and my website has all kind of stuff, resources, and then they can get the book anywhere books are sold. But I would go to Amazon and just grab a copy, and they'll send it to your doorstep. You'll have it in a day or two, and it's new. We just launched it Saturday night a week ago was our book launch, and we're getting just such great responses. I heard from a great business leader in Houston yesterday, and he said, I've had your book for 2 days, and I'm facing a serious biopsy on Tuesday that I was so worried about. And I still haven't, and this was on Monday, he said, I haven't even had the biopsy done yet, but I'm not worried like I was. There's a whole different way that I'm approaching this now. So that's my reward. I actually, and I appreciate you saying that it's a good book to put down, pick back up, because it is meaty. It's not. I think you would agree. It's not trivial. It's not. It's not a difficult read, but it's not trivial. It's got lots of content. I actually adjusted that because a lady that is the #1 publicist in America is a friend of mine, and she looked at this book about 2 years ago when I was still in the works with it. It was 300 pages, and she read it, and she offered to publish it for me. But she said, "Mike, this is like a college textbook on happiness. You're going to have to simplify this some." And I said, "Okay, well, I would rather hear that than," because she will tell you exactly what she thinks.
Yeah.
And if she just said, "Look, there's just not enough here. This is fluff," I would have been really sad. But when she said, "Hey, this is great, but it's too deep. It's like a college textbook. You're going to have to simplify it a little bit." That was okay. But I'm really thankful for the book. It was 5 years in the works, and I will tell you this: from the time I got the impulse and the direction to write it, which incidentally, my first reaction was, happiness, really? I mean, that's kind of trivial. Let's give me something big. But I had no idea what I personally and what the world was going to go through in the next 5 years while I'm writing a book on happiness.
Wow. Wow.
My son had a breakdown that was leading the church that I turned to him. My daughter had a second occurrence of breast cancer, and it came back stage 4. And so we entered that battle again with her. This is all during, I'm writing a book on happiness. Then we installed a young man to pastor the church that I founded, and he got COVID and passed away in 10 days, 56 years old in perfect health. And it's not like we haven't been through some things since this book has been being birthed. But that's why I feel it so strongly, is because the truths of this book walked me personally through the darkest places I've ever been through in my life. And I have a deeper, more peaceful happiness than I've ever had. I know it works. I'm not prescribing something that hasn't worked for me.
That's beautiful. And I read a lot of books, and there were sections in the book where I literally said, okay, I have to go back to that, reread it to get it further absorbed. But just that moment when you were talking about Moses, I'm like, this is like speaking to me so much, because
Yeah.
you know, it goes to that 1%. I feel like I have a certain strength inside of me that makes me very courageous, where I will go forward when someone else won't. But at the same time, I have to learn how to hone that, because that the power is in control of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is what I sense. If you'll allow me just to bless
Yeah.
you, I've enjoyed talking with you. You do have something really special in your life. And here's what I feel like telling you. Uh, all of us have gone through difficult things, and I'm sure that you have. And I sense that you're strong because you've had to be strong. And here's what I want to encourage you to do. I want you to keep doing what you're doing and stay strong, but I want you to allow the happiness that's so real and so rich that God wants you to have, enjoyment. I want you to allow that to chase you down. You don't have to pursue it. Just allow that kind of happiness to happen to you. It's going to be beautiful. And I encourage you in that. I hope we can talk again. I've really enjoyed visiting with you. Good connection.
Thank you so much. Such a great connection. And I encourage everyone to get the book, and we will be in touch, because we need Mike Hayes in our life. That is for sure.
Well, I'm honored. And please reach out anytime, and we'll do some catch-up conversations.
Good. Thank you, everyone.